Frank Norris adjusted his tie for the 5th time in as many minutes. The diplomatic shuttle approached the massive space station hanging in orbit around Jupiter. This was it, humanity's first official meeting with the Galactic Concordat. Nervous, Frank? Olivia Martinez asked, her captain's uniform crisp and perfect. She commanded the ESS Harbinger with a gentle but firm hand, and Frank was glad she was here. Not nervous. Just aware of the stakes. Frank replied with a smile. His years in both military service and international diplomacy had prepared him for tense situations, but this was beyond anything in human experience. Olivia nodded. The team is ready. Everyone knows the protocols. The diplomatic team had been chosen specifically for their unflappable politeness and emotional control. 6 men and women who could maintain pleasant expressions while negotiating with terrorists or during natural disasters. If anyone could make a good first impression for humanity, it was them. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud. Frank stood and addressed the team. Remember, folks, firm handshakes if they have hands, direct eye contact if they have eyes, and smiles at all times. The airlock cycled open, revealing 3 aliens waiting in the reception area. The central figure was tall and slender, with iridescent skin that shifted between blue and green. 4 arms were folded across its chest and a frilled crest rose from its head. Ambassador Zekatal, Frank said with a wide smile, stepping forward with hand extended. On behalf of Earth and all humanity, we are delighted to meet you. The alien didn't take his hand but took a step back. Its large eyes blinked rapidly. Human Ambassador Norris, Zekatal said, voice coming through the translation device with a metallic edge. Your presence is acknowledged. Please follow standard diplomatic distance protocols. Frank lowered his hand but maintained his smile. Of course, my apologies for any discomfort. The alien delegation led them through wide corridors to a large circular room with a table in the center. Frank noticed how the aliens maintained at least 6 feet of distance from the humans at all times. Once seated, Frank placed both hands on the table in plain view, still smiling. The rest of the human delegation followed his lead. We have observed your planet for many cycles, Zekatal said. Your technological advancement is impressive for your species' age. Thank you, Frank nodded. We're quick learners and eager to join the galactic community. As the meeting progressed, Frank noticed the aliens growing increasingly restless. When Olivia maintained eye contact with one of them while discussing trade possibilities, the alien's skin changed to a mottled purple color. During a brief recess, Frank whispered to Olivia, "Something's wrong. They seem uncomfortable with our most basic diplomatic behavior." "I noticed," she replied quietly. "They flinch every time we smile or look directly at them." When they returned to the table, Frank deliberately softened his expression and tried to make his posture less formal. The alien seemed to relax slightly until Jack Porter, one of the human diplomats, accidentally stepped on what appeared to be an appendage of one of the smaller aliens. "Oh my goodness, I am terribly sorry," Jack exclaimed, immediately crouching down. "Are you hurt? Can I help in any way? That was completely my fault." The alien backed away rapidly, its skin flashing bright yellow. A high-pitched sound came from its breathing holes. "Please," Zekatal said, raising all 4 hands. "Your delegate must restrain his aggressive appeasement behaviors." Frank frowned slightly. Aggressive appeasement? He was apologizing for an accident. The intensity of his submission display exceeds acceptable parameters, Zekatal explained, the translator struggling to convey the concept. Such extreme posturing suggests preparation for significant conflict resolution. The diplomatic meeting continued. With growing tension, every time the humans employed what they considered basic courtesy, offering to let aliens speak first, smiling in agreement, maintaining eye contact during conversation, the aliens grew more visibly distressed. When Frank pulled out a chair for Dr. Lynn Weber, another member of the human delegation, the aliens whispered urgently among themselves. Finally, after 4 hours of careful negotiation, the initial diplomatic contact was concluded. A preliminary friendship treaty was ready to be signed. As is Earth custom, Frank said, picking up a pen. I'll sign first as the visiting party. You will use that sharp implement? Zikatal asked, stepping back. Frank looked at the simple ballpoint pen in his hand. It's just a writing tool. You handle potential weapons with such casual disregard, Zikatal noted. Truly your species has unique psychological adaptations. After the signing ceremony was complete, the aliens escorted the human delegation back to their shuttle with obvious relief. Once aboard and away from the station, the team finally relaxed. What just happened? Jack asked, loosening his tie. I've negotiated with warlords who were more comfortable than these aliens. Olivia tapped her tablet thoughtfully. I think our normal diplomatic behavior reads as something entirely different to them. Frank nodded, reviewing his notes. They called your apology aggressive appeasement, and they seemed terrified when I pulled out Dr. Weber's chair. And the smiling, Lynn added. Every time we smiled, they got more nervous. Frank stared out the viewport at the alien station growing smaller behind them. I think we may have a fundamental problem. What we consider polite, they see as something else. Threatening, Olivia suggested. Maybe. Frank rubbed his chin. Think about it from their perspective. We maintain constant eye contact, which for many Earth predators is a dominance behavior. We bare our teeth by smiling. We stand close. To them, invading their space. We insist on going last through doors and letting them go first. Standard courtesy, Jack said with a shrug. To us, Frank replied. But what if they see it as psychological warfare? What if our politeness reads as a kind of dominance display? The shuttle fell silent as the implications sank in. So what do we do? Lynn finally asked. Stop being polite? Frank shook his head. No. We need to understand what they're seeing when we act this way. For now, we maintain diplomatic protocols but pay close attention to their reactions. Olivia nodded in agreement. I'll compile a report for Earth Command. They need to understand that our first contact situation is more complicated than we anticipated. As the shuttle accelerated toward Earth, Frank stared at his reflection in the viewport. He tried to see himself as the aliens might. A creature that maintained an artificial facial expression while making direct visual challenges, that wielded potential weapons casually, that engaged in elaborate dominance rituals disguised as courtesy. We come in peace, he murmured to himself. But everything about us says otherwise. The ESS Harbinger received them back with standard military protocol. As Frank walked through the ship toward his quarters, he found himself noticing how many aspects of human interaction involved ritual politeness. Crew members stepped aside in hallways with a nod. Officers acknowledged each other with eye contact and smiles. Everyone maintained careful physical boundaries. It was civilization's way of containing the animal within. And apparently, to the rest of the galaxy, it made humans terrifying. Frank sat at his desk and began writing his report to Earth Command. The title came easily. Initial Contact Assessment. Why Aliens Fear the Soft Side of Deathworlders. 6 months after first contact, Frank Norris stood in the gleaming lobby of the newly established human embassy on Concordat Prime. The central political world of the Galactic Concordat buzzed with alien life forms of all shapes and sizes, and, in the middle of it all stood a building of Earth design. Quite a sight, isn't it? Gregory Washington said, approaching from behind. The newly appointed human ambassador to the Concordat was known for his warm southern charm and elaborate courtesy. His smile was wide and genuine as he surveyed the embassy. Impressive, sir, Frank replied. 6 months ago they were afraid to shake our hands. Now we have an embassy on their capital world. Progress is a beautiful thing, Frank, Gregory said. And speaking of progress, the reception starts in 1 hour. Our first major diplomatic function on alien soil. Frank nodded, consulting his tablet. All preparations are complete. Chef has prepared both human and Concordat-suitable dishes. The staff has been briefed on modified diplomatic protocols. After first contact, Frank had been promoted to Chief of Human Concordat Relations. His report on alien reactions to human courtesy had sparked intense debate back on Earth. Some officials wanted to abandon traditional human diplomatic behavior entirely. Frank had argued successfully for a middle path, maintaining human social customs but explaining them carefully to their alien counterparts. The embassy reception was their first big test. Over 50 alien dignitaries would attend, representing 12 different species from the Concordat. Frank was checking the placement of translator devices when Olivia Martinez entered. She had been appointed military attaché to the embassy, a position that kept her close to the diplomatic action. "Frank," she said with a nod, "the security team is ready. No weapons visible as requested." "Perfect. We don't want to spook them with guards." Olivia smiled. "No, our politeness does that well enough." As guests began to arrive, Frank observed Ambassador Washington greet each alien dignitary personally. He maintained what humans would consider a respectful distance but still closer than Concordat protocol suggested. He smiled warmly at each visitor, made direct eye contact, and offered personalized greetings. "High Minister Grechtal, I'm delighted you could join us. Your speech on interstellar commerce last week was truly insightful." The amphibious alien minister blinked rapidly, a sign of discomfort that Frank had learned to recognize. From across the room, Frank noticed Etlaran, a xenopsychologist from the Vorid species. She had been studying human behavior since first contact. Now she stood in a corner, recording device in hand, watching Ambassador Washington work the room with increasing alarm in her large eyes. "Fascinating, isn't it?" Frank said, approaching her carefully. Etlaran's breathing flaps fluttered. "Your ambassador engages in extreme social dominance displays with every interaction." Frank suppressed a sigh. They still didn't understand. "On Earth, we call it being a good host. Personal attention makes guests feel valued." He remembers personal details about each visitor. He maintains eye contact while speaking directly of their accomplishments. These are intimidation techniques, among many species. Before Frank could respond, a commotion broke out near the refreshment table. A tall insectoid alien was backing away from a human server who held a tray of drinks. "Is there a problem?" Frank asked, hurrying over. The alien's mandibles clicked rapidly. "The human offered to bring me a beverage, then insisted on walking behind me to my seat." The server looked confused. "I was just trying to be helpful." Frank quickly stepped in. "A misunderstanding. On Earth, service staff often follow guests with refreshments as a convenience." He turned to the server. "Please allow our guests to carry their own drinks." Throughout the evening, similar incidents multiplied. The human's habit of holding doors open for others was interpreted as controlling access. Their practice of offering seats to newcomers was seen as dictating positions. Every please and thank you seemed to increase the alien's discomfort. The crisis point came during dinner, as humans unconsciously picked up their knives and forks while maintaining pleasant conversation. A wave of unease passed through the alien guests. "They perform weapon handling while discussing weather patterns," one alien whispered loudly. "The psychological control is remarkable." Ambassador Washington noticed the tension and clinked his glass gently. "Friends, I see some concern about our eating implements. On Earth, these tools evolved from weapons, yes, but have been used peacefully for centuries. We don't even think about them as anything but tools for eating." His explanation seemed to calm some guests, but Frank noticed Etlaran furiously taking notes. After the reception, Frank found her in the embassy garden. The 3 moons of Concordat Prime cast soft light over the transplanted earth flowers. "You're documenting all our social infractions?" he asked. Etlaran's head tilted. "I study the psychological warfare techniques of humans. You are most puzzling predators." "We're not engaging in psychological warfare," Frank insisted. "These are just customs developed over thousands of years." "Precisely. You evolved on a world with large predators and competing hominid species. Your courtesy, as you call it, is a complex system of dominant signals designed to maintain peace between dangerous beings." Frank paused, considering her words. "I never thought of it that way. When Ambassador Washington insists others enter a room first, he is demonstrating control of the space. When he remembers personal details, he signals his mind is powerful. enough to track potential threats. When he smiles constantly, he shows he can maintain an artificial facial expression indefinitely. Those interpretations never occur to us, Frank said. Which makes it more disturbing, Adlaran replied. These behaviors are so deeply ingrained, you perform them unconsciously. The next morning, Frank called an emergency staff meeting. As he explained Adlaran's observations, faces around the table showed surprise and concern. So everything we do to be nice comes across as threatening? Olivia asked. Not threatening exactly, Frank replied. More like psychologically dominant. They see our politeness as a sign that we're extremely dangerous beings exercising elaborate self-control. Gregory Washington stroked his chin thoughtfully. Well, they're not entirely wrong, are they? Human history is full of violence. Our elaborate social rules did evolve partly to keep the peace between ourselves. The problem, Frank continued, is that they're spreading the word. I've heard reports that humans are being described as masters of aggressive courtesy and weaponized pleasantness throughout the Concordat. So what do we do? Asked one of the junior diplomats. Stop being polite? Frank shook his head. We need to help them understand us better. From now on, we explain the purpose behind our customs as we practice them. We need to make our implicit social rules explicit. Olivia nodded in agreement. And maybe we learn to be comfortable with their customs too. Show we can adapt. As the meeting ended, Frank gazed out at the alien city beyond the embassy windows. What humans considered their best qualities, their courtesy, their hospitality, their respect, were being interpreted as signs of a dangerous species barely keeping its violent nature in check. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humans had worked so hard to put their best foot forward, only to discover that their best foot was the one aliens feared most. Frank Norris stood by the large window in his office, watching alien visitors tour the embassy gardens. 3 months had passed since the embassy reception, and the situation had not improved. If anything, it had grown more complex. The first cultural exchange groups arrive tomorrow, Sophia Miller said from behind him. As the embassy's cultural anthropologist, she had been working day and night to prepare for this moment. Frank turned to face her. Are we ready? Sophia held up a tablet. I've created detailed guides on human etiquette for our alien visitors. And we've briefed the humans going to Concordat worlds on basic alien customs. Let me see that, Frank said, taking the tablet. He scrolled through the document titled Human Social Customs, a guide for galactic visitors. The more he read, the more his concern grew. Sophia, have you shown this to any aliens yet? She shook her head. I wanted your approval first. Frank handed the tablet back. If I'm reading this with alien eyes, it looks like a manual of psychological warfare techniques. Maintain eye contact to show respect. Offer to help before being asked. Remember personal details about others. These are exactly the behaviors that frighten them. Sophia's face fell. But these are just basic manners. How do we teach aliens about humans without explaining our social rules? Before Frank could answer, his communication device buzzed. Olivia Martinez's face appeared on the screen. Frank, we have a situation. Commander Kralvex has called an emergency meeting of the Concordat Security Council. Something about humans. Frank felt a chill run down his spine. Kralvex was a military commander from a species known for their straightforward communication. He had been openly suspicious of humans since first contact. I'll be right there, Frank said, already heading for the door. The Security Council chamber was a large, circular room with tiered seating. Frank and Olivia were shown to the center, where witnesses and presenters spoke. Around them sat representatives from 23 species, all members of the Concordat security apparatus. Commander Kralvex stood at a raised platform. His species resembled large reptiles with armored skin and 4 eyes placed for maximum visual coverage. The human presence has created unprecedented security concerns, Kralvex began without preamble. Their behavior patterns suggest systematic psychological operation techniques. Frank stepped forward. Commander, I must object. There is no psychological operation. These are simply cultural differences. Evidence suggests otherwise, Kralvex interrupted. Observe. A large screen displayed footage from various human-alien interactions over the past 9 months. In each clip, humans were simply being polite by Earth standards, offering seats to others, bringing refreshments without being asked, remembering names and personal details, holding doors open. Note the consistent patterns, Kralvex continued. They insist others precede them through entrances, maintaining control of exit routes. They provide sustenance without request, creating obligation bonds. They track personal information about potential targets. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Frank looked at Olivia, whose face showed the same concern he felt. Most disturbing, Kralvex said, they have begun deploying these techniques on multiple concordant worlds simultaneously. The screen showed footage of the first human cultural exchange groups who had arrived on various planets. In every case, they were shown being unfailingly polite to their hosts. This is not a security threat, Frank said firmly. This is human culture. We're trying to be respectful according to our customs. An alien counselor with glowing tendrils spoke up. Why do humans insist on approaching others with bared teeth? Frank sighed. We call it smiling. It's a sign of friendliness, not aggression. Yet you maintain this facial configuration even when discussing serious matters, another counselor noted. This suggests extreme emotional control. Or it suggests we're genuinely pleased to meet new species, Olivia added. The debate continued, for hours. Frank tried to explain each human behavior that concerned the council, but his explanations often seemed to make things worse. The concept that humans genuinely enjoyed meeting strangers was apparently more disturbing than the idea that they were manipulating them for tactical advantage. As the council session ended, an incident report arrived from a concordant world where human tourists had attended a cultural event. Apparently, their standing and applauding at the end had been interpreted as a threatening mob action, causing panic. This can't go on, Frank told Olivia as they walked back to the embassy. Every attempt to be friendly digs us deeper into trouble. Back at the embassy, they found Sophia in a state of distress. The thank you notes were a disaster, she said without preamble. Frank blinked. What thank you notes? After the trade summit last week, our delegation sent handwritten notes to all participants. Standard diplomatic protocol on Earth. The Concordat. Security force intercepted them as suspicious communications and now believes they contain coded threats. Frank sat heavily in a chair. Because we were being polite. It's worse, Sophia continued. When humans on exchange programs learned about the misunderstandings, they tried to be less formal. Their casual friendliness turned out to be even more disturbing to aliens who can't understand why anyone would speak to strangers without necessity. The next morning, Frank called an emergency meeting with all human diplomatic staff. The situation had reached a breaking point. We need to completely rethink our approach, he told the assembled team. Everything we do to be friendly is being interpreted as threatening. Our entire diplomatic playbook is backfiring. So what do we do? Gregory Washington asked. We can't stop being human. No, Frank agreed. But we need to help them understand why we are the way we are. Sophia Miller raised her hand. I've been thinking about this. What if we show them our history? Not just the sanitized diplomatic version, the real history of human conflict and how we develop these social rules precisely because we are dangerous to each other. A murmur went through the room as people considered this approach. It's risky, Olivia said. Showing them how violent human history has been might confirm their fears. Or, Frank said slowly, it might help them understand that our politeness isn't a trick. It's a necessary adaptation for a species that needed to live together despite being territorial and capable of violence. The debate continued late into the night. By morning, they had a plan. Frank would propose a special educational summit where humans would explain their evolutionary history as predator omnivores from a dangerous world who developed complex social rules to enable cooperation. As Frank prepared his proposal, he realized they were at a turning point. Either aliens would understand humans better after learning about their past, or they would become even more fearful of the smiling predators who had emerged from a death world with elaborate social rituals designed to keep the peace among natural killers. Either way, the days of humans trying to hide their nature behind a mask of simple politeness were over. The truth would come out, however uncomfortable it might be. The grand hall of the Concordat Central Archives had never held such a tense gathering. Frank Norris stood before a mixed audience of alien diplomats, security officials, and cultural experts. Behind him, a large screen displayed images of ancient Earth. "To understand humans," Frank began, "you must understand where we come from." The images shifted to show early humans on the African savanna, surrounded by predators larger and faster than themselves. We did not evolve as the dominant species on our world. For most of our history, we were prey as well as predators. We survived through cooperation and planning. Frank glanced at Sophia Miller, who managed the presentation, and Peter Russell, the military attaché who had helped prepare this critical briefing. Both gave him encouraging nods. Our social customs, what you call our psychological techniques, developed because humans needed ways to live together without killing each other over resources. The screen showed early human settlements, then ancient cities, then modern metropolises. Our politeness is not a trick. It's how we survived as a species. In the audience, Ms. Kreth, a senior diplomat assigned to study human behavior, leaned forward with interest. Unlike many of her colleagues, she had approached humans with curiosity rather than fear. The presentation continued with frank depictions of human warfare through the ages, showing how devastating humans could be when politeness broke down. Frank didn't hide the darker chapters of human history but placed them in context. We smile, maintain eye contact, and remember personal details because these actions signal peaceful intentions among potential rivals. We developed elaborate social rituals precisely because we understand our own capacity for violence. When the formal presentation ended, the alien audience seemed stunned into silence. Then Ms. Kreth stood. "You are saying that human courtesy evolved as a mechanism to prevent violence between natural predators?" "Yes," Frank said simply. "Our politeness isn't fake or manipulative. It's how we channel our natural instincts into peaceful cooperation." The revelation created a ripple effect throughout the Concordat diplomatic corps. For the first time, many aliens began to see human behavior not as sinister manipulation, but as a sophisticated adaptation. Days later, Frank met with Ms. Kreth and Sophia to develop a new framework for human-alien relations. The problem, Ms. Kreth explained, was that we interpreted human behaviors through our own evolutionary history. My species evolved as herd animals. We signal friendship by keeping distance and avoiding eye contact to reduce stress. Sophia nodded. While humans signal friendship by coming closer and making eye contact to show attention. Exactly the opposite, Frank realized. No wonder there's been so much misunderstanding. Working together, they created a comprehensive guide explaining human social behaviors not as psychological warfare, but as ritualized non-aggression. The document was distributed throughout the Concordat. Meanwhile, Peter Russell discovered disturbing intelligence suggesting that several species were still advocating for cutting ties with humanity. Some even considered humans too dangerous to allow into the wider galaxy. Frank brought this information to an emergency meeting with Ambassador Washington and Captain Martinez. The historical presentation helped, Frank said, but many species remain deeply uncomfortable with us. The radical faction is gaining support. Gregory Washington sighed. Perhaps we've been too focused on explaining. We need to show them through actions that we're trustworthy. But every action we take seems to make things worse, Olivia pointed out. A breakthrough came unexpectedly during a routine diplomatic function. A human delegate named Lisa Brown was speaking with a nervous alien diplomat when she simply stopped smiling and asked directly, "Does my facial expression make you uncomfortable? I can stop if it helps." The alien was startled by her directness, but visibly relaxed when Lisa maintained a neutral expression. Their conversation became the most productive human-alien exchange to date. Frank quickly incorporated this approach into the diplomatic handbook. Humans began asking aliens directly, about their comfort levels and adjusting their behavior accordingly. They explained their actions before performing them. I'm going to extend my hand now, which is our greeting custom. You can touch it or not, as you prefer. Aliens began to realize that humans didn't consider maintaining eye contact and smiling to be stressful. It was their natural state when attempting friendship. This revelation changed the entire framework of understanding. New diplomatic protocols were established. Humans agreed to more direct communication and fewer social rituals when dealing with most alien species. In return, aliens began to accept that human politeness was not a form of deception, but a genuine cultural expression. The crisis seemed to be diffusing until a distress call came from a remote sector of space. A Concordat scientific vessel was under attack by space pirates. The nearest ship was a human diplomatic cruiser with minimal weapons. Against orders, the human captain engaged the pirates to protect the alien scientists. The aliens watched in shock as the polite, smiling humans transformed into efficient warriors. Video footage of the incident spread throughout the Concordat. It showed humans fighting fiercely to protect aliens they barely knew, then immediately returning to their courteous behavior once the danger passed. At the embassy, Frank watched the footage with Gregory and Olivia. This could go either way, Frank said quietly. Either they'll see that we use our capacity for violence to protect others, or they'll be terrified by the confirmation that beneath our politeness lies a warrior species, Olivia finished. They didn't have to wait long for the answer. The next day, the Concordat Security Council called an emergency session. Frank, Gregory, and Peter attended, prepared for the worst. Commander Kralvek stood to address the council, his 4 eyes fixed on the human delegation. Recent events have clarified the nature of humanity, he began. We have witnessed their capacity for both extreme violence and extreme restraint. Frank held his breath. It is the conclusion of the security forces that humans are indeed dangerous, Kralvex continued. But their danger is tempered by discipline and directed by moral principles we can understand, if not share. The Council voted to continue relations with humanity, but with a new classification: Deathworld Diplomatic Priority. This designation acknowledged humans as potentially dangerous allies rather than threats. As they left the council chamber, Peter turned to Frank. Is that a victory? Frank considered the question. They've stopped seeing our politeness as a trick. They now understand it's a genuine part of who we are, a species that developed elaborate social rules precisely because we needed them. And they're still afraid of us, Olivia added. Yes, Frank admitted. But now they're afraid of us for the right reasons. 1 year after first contact, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Concordat buzzed with nervous energy. Today marked the first address by a human head of state to the full Concordat Assembly. Over 300 representatives from 42 spacefaring species filled the massive chamber. Frank Norris stood to one side of the stage watching as final preparations were made. The past few months had been intense but productive. After the space pirate incident, perceptions of humanity had shifted. Aliens still found humans unsettling, but now they understood why. Nervous? Olivia Martinez asked, joining him near the side entrance. A bit, Frank admitted. President Bennett isn't known for her subtlety. Alice Bennett, the newly elected president of the United Earth government, had a reputation for straight talk. Some in the diplomatic corps had worried about her addressing the Concordat, but Frank had argued in her favor. Perhaps directness was exactly what was needed now. The chamber lights dimmed slightly, signaling the start of the session. Grand Arbiter Vikazal, the highest authority in the Concordat, stepped to the central podium. His species resembled tall, slender birds with iridescent feathers and elongated faces. Members of the Concordat, Vikazal began, voice carrying through the translation system. Today we welcome President Alice Bennett of Earth, who will address this assembly on behalf of humanity. President Bennett walked onto the stage with confidence. She wore a simple blue suit and nodded respectfully to Vikazal before taking the podium. Representatives of the Concordat, she began without preamble. I come to you today with a simple message. Humans want to be your friends, but we understand why that scares you. A murmur ran through the chamber. Her directness was unusual in concordant diplomacy. For the past year, there have been misunderstandings between our peoples. What humans consider politeness, many of you see as psychological manipulation. What we view as courtesy, you interpret as dominance displays. Bennett paused, looking around the hall. Today I propose a new approach. We call it transparent diplomacy. On the large screens around the hall, a document appeared titled the Declaration of Aggressive Friendship. This declaration formally recognizes that humans will continue to act like humans. Bennett continued. We will smile when happy. We will look at you when speaking to you. We will remember details about your lives because we care. We will hold doors and offer help because that's who we are. She tapped the podium lightly. But this declaration also commits us to explaining our actions clearly, to announcing our cultural practices before engaging in them, and to respecting the comfort boundaries of all species we encounter. Frank watched the alien representatives. Some seemed skeptical, others intrigued. In return, Bennett said, we ask only that you accept these behaviors as non-threatening cultural expressions. Judge us by our actions, not by your interpretation of our manners. When she finished speaking, there was silence. Then Grand Arbiter Vikizal stepped forward. President Bennett's proposal is unusual but addresses fundamental concerns. The Concordant leadership has studied human history extensively since our first meeting. We have reached some important conclusions. Vikizal gestured, and the screens changed to show images of Earth, its oceans, mountains, dense forests, and predatory animals. Humans evolved on what we would classify as a death world. Their planet contains large predators, extreme weather, and constant dangers. They were neither the strongest nor fastest species, yet they survived through cooperation, planning, and highly regulated social interactions. The Grand Arbiter's feathers rippled, a sign of deep thought among his species. After careful consideration, the Concordant has reclassified Earth from emerging civilization to death world diplomatic priority. Frank and Olivia exchanged glances. This was a significant change in status. This classification acknowledges that humans are potentially dangerous, but directs their capabilities toward constructive purposes. Vikizal explained. Their social behaviors, what we once misinterpreted as psychological warfare, are in fact survival adaptations that allowed a naturally aggressive species to build cooperation. President Bennett nodded. We accept this classification and understand its implications. Humans know what we are capable of, both good and bad. Our elaborate politeness developed precisely because we needed ways to live together despite our capacity for violence. After the formal speeches, a symbolic ceremony began. Human diplomats taught alien representatives to shake hands while alien diplomats demonstrated their greeting customs to the humans. It was awkward, sometimes humorous, but deeply meaningful. Frank found himself paired with Ms. Kreth. Among my people, we greet trusted associates by turning our backs to them, showing vulnerability, she explained. Frank nodded and carefully turned his back to her. And among humans, we shake hands to show we're not holding weapons. Later at the reception, following the ceremony, Frank watched as humans and aliens mingled with new understanding. There were still awkward moments and cultural missteps, but the air of suspicion had largely dissipated. Quite a change from our first meeting, said a voice behind him. Frank turned to see Ambassador Zeke-Tal, who had been present at that first contact near Jupiter so many months ago. Indeed, Frank agreed. You were terrified of our smiles then. We didn't understand, Zeke-Tal admitted. We interpreted your behaviors through our own evolutionary lens. My species uses facial expressions only for aggression displays. The concept of baring teeth as a friendly gesture was incomprehensible. And now we understand that your politeness is not deception. It is a necessary adaptation for predators who chose to become builders instead. Across the room, Frank noticed something remarkable. An alien child and a human child, part of the diplomatic families, were playing together. Neither knew the complex diplomatic protocols or evolutionary history. They simply adjusted to each other naturally, finding common ground through play. Frank pointed this out to Olivia, who had joined them. "Look there, the next generation won't need declarations or explanations." Olivia smiled. "They'll grow up, knowing each other as people, not as concepts." As the reception continued, Frank reflected on the long journey from that first contact. Humans had entered the galactic community hoping to put their best foot forward, only to discover that what they considered their best qualities, courtesy, hospitality, politeness, were precisely what made other species uncomfortable. The irony wasn't lost on him. After all their diplomatic efforts, what finally brought understanding wasn't humans pretending to be something they weren't. It was humans being honest about exactly what they were. Deathworlders who had transformed their survival mechanisms into social bonds. The alien fear of human politeness wouldn't disappear overnight, but now there was context for it, understanding behind it, and a path forward through it. Frank raised his glass in a silent toast. To aggressive politeness, humanity's most unusual export to the stars.